Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. As the sugaring season starts to tap out, we have a story from Vermont's Indigenous people. From Polar Productions, here's Chief Don Stevens with how maple syrup came to the people.
One day, this hunter was walking back to the village, unsuccessful. So as he started to get closer and closer to the village, it started to get dark out. He knew that he wouldn't make it to the village that night. So he stopped off and sat next to this maple tree. And he started thinking, boy, it'd be nice to have something to eat. Of course, he wasn't successful. And in our culture, some of our hunters would carry beans around their neck. So that way, if they weren't successful, they could eat. So he broke his necklace off and put some beans into a pot that he carried with him and started a fire. And he goes, I wish I had some liquid in order to cook my supper, my beans. And he happened to be sitting next to an old maple tree that still knew how to talk to humans. He heard this voice saying, I could give you some of my sap if you would like. If you just snap off one of my limbs, you can fill up your pot. So he reached up and he snapped off a limb, and some of the sap started to come out of this limb. And he said, oh, well, there's some liquid. So he picked up his pot and he filled his pot and he set it next to the fire so it could cook. So he said, well, I'm kind of thirsty myself. So he reached up and he put his mouth around this twig and he started drinking some of the sap that was dripping from the limb. He goes, oh my God, this is sweet. This is awesome. He says, I've never tasted anything like this before. He grabbed his beans and he tasted them. He said, oh my God, these beans are so sweet. And he said, I gotta prove that this is true. So he picked up his stuff and he went back to the village. It was about a half a day's hike. Back to the village. He went into his house and his wife looked at him and said, no meat again? And he goes, no, I wasn't successful at hunting, but I got something awesome. He goes, taste these beans. And she said, okay. So she reached in and she goes, oh my God, this is sweet. Where did you get the sweetener? And he goes, I was up in the maple grove and this voice came to me about how do I get some of this sweet sap from the tree that I could cook my beans. And he told her the whole story. So she took the pot of beans and they went outside and they started telling the villagers what happened and her husband's story. And they were all tasting the beans and they were all like, we got to go see for ourselves. So all the villagers went up to this maple grove and they started snapping twigs off and they started drinking this sap. And they go, oh my God, this is fabulous. I'm never going to leave. This is wonderful. I've never tasted anything like this. They would go to sleep and they'd wake up and they'd drink more and they'd continue this cycle. Well, in the meantime, while all this was happening, Gluskapi, the creator of humans, was going around checking the villages to kind of find out how people were doing because he created humans. He wanted to actually, check on them, see if they needed anything, what was happening. So he came upon this village and it was mid-afternoon and he didn't see anybody around. He thought it was kind of strange. He kind of felt the coals and the coals were cold of the fire. And he said, well, that's kind of strange. There's nobody around. I wonder if they all just went for trading or hunting. So he said, you know what? They'll probably be back in the morning. So he built himself a fire and cooked himself some supper. And, he laid down and went to sleep. So by the next morning, he was starting to get worried. Like, what happened to the villagers? I should go find them. I need to go look for them. So he started walking around until he could find their tracks. And he started following their tracks. And as he was getting closer and closer to the forest, the maple trees, he started hearing this moaning. Oh my God. He's like, stop. And he goes, I've never heard this before. Is this some sort of wild animal? What's going on? I need to be cautious. So he started approaching the maple sugar grove cautiously and figured out what's going on. And then he started seeing all these people laying all over. Some were laying on the ground, holding their bellies, smiling. Some were attached to the trees, with their mouth, drinking stuff. And he started to see the trees, and the trees were starting to die. And he goes, you can't keep doing this. You need to get back to your village. You need to prepare for spring and the planting season. You can't just lay here all the time and drink this syrup. Nothing's going to get done. You're getting lazy. And besides, you're killing the trees. Can't you tell? Every time you break their limb, they don't have any leaves that can grow. You're breaking their limbs so they can't nourish themselves. You're killing them. You're breaking all their limbs. And they said, well, we just can't stop. He pulled some off and they just went right back to it. Just like a baby would go back to their bottle, like he kept pulling them off and he says, I don't know what to do. I better go talk to the Creator. He said, the whole goal of being in Trinity with the earth is that we're supposed to work together and we're supposed to help each other. And the plants are providing for us. And this old maple talked to this person and tried to help them over a crisis of him not having enough for his one meal. And now they're killing these trees by drinking too much, and they're being greedy. They're not working, they're being fat, they're getting lazy, and they're just not being in balance. They're not harmony. What can I do to stop them from this? And the Creator said, you have to make it taste non-palatable so you can break them of that habit. And he goes, well, what do I do? And he goes, well, water is the lifeblood of everything. Why don't you water the trees down so that way it dilutes the sap? So that way it's not maple syrup coming out of the trees. And he said, I could do that, but I don't have a way to do that. Can you give me something? So the Creator made this magical basket out of birch bark that would automatically fill as soon as it was empty. He goes, take this basket, it'll fill with water, and continue to dump water in the trees until it's so diluted that they won't like the taste anymore. It won't be as sweet as it used to be. And he said, okay. So he grabbed this bucket and he went out to the maple grove and he kept pouring water into these trees. And it took 40 buckets of water in order for the people to detach from the tree. And as they detached from the tree, they were like, what happened? Where did all our sweet, beautiful maple syrup go? We don't want to lose this. We're sorry. We didn't mean to do this, but it's just so delicious that we got to have it. And he said, I tell you what. He goes, I don't want to deny you the pleasure of having something sweet and to disconnect from working with the trees and the land, of being in harmony with the land and the animals, so that way you could still provide for the trees and the trees provide for you. But we're going to set a limit. So as you come out of the lodge, there's a time period between the time the snow stops and it starts getting warmer and when it's time that you can plant, because the ground's not ready to be worked yet. I will make a deal with you. If you continue to move on and do what you're supposed to, you can make as much maple syrup as you want, working in harmony with the trees, but then it'll turn bitter. So as the leaves start to come out, it'll turn bitter because the trees need to survive. They need the leaves in order to grow. So that means you're going to have to gather as much wood as you can. And you're going to have to boil those 40 gallons of water out of it in order to get back to the original taste of what you first found. That means you have to work as a community. You have to work together, because not one person could singly cut all enough wood, gather the sap, and boil it. This is going to be a team building thing. So you're going to cut the wood, you're going to boil the sap, and then you're going to enjoy it for the rest of the time. But you're not going to hoard it, because as you know with maple syrup, it's very sugary that it will mold after a while. But if you take that off and reheat it, then it'll come back to normal. But you can cook your food in this sap and boil it down so that way you get the sweetness of it. If you want to go further, you have to work harder and put it into a powder form, and then you could save it in the magic birch bark containers. That would keep it sealed from spoiling. But that's going to take even more work. And you're going to do it because all we had was clay pots. And clay pots could break if they're too big. So the lesson here is that you're going to work as a community. You're going to work hard. You're still going to be able to achieve what you want, but you have to do it together and you have to work hard. And then you'll have that to go all year round if you work even harder to keep it into a sugary form. If you just want to cook your food in it, you just have the sap and then you're done, or you can go even further. But that's depends how much effort you want to put into it, because you can't just take, you have to work for it. So that's how maple syrup came to us. And that's why we would collect it in bark baskets, and we would boil it in clay pots until the Europeans came, and then we would trade for metal. And then some of the first priests that came over would see us gathering these things from the trees, the syrup or the sap, to boil it down, and we would trade for kettle pots, because it's a lot easier to cook something in a kettle pot than it would be to cook it in ceramic or pots and try to store it. So that's the priests, when they came over to Christianize us, they would see that we were doing this, and they documented us making splines and cutting them into the tree to be able to get the sap to gather in the buckets, and then working together to make this syrup. So that originated with the native people, and that's the maple syrup story of how it came to us and why we use it as teaching teamwork, hard work, and our relationship with the trees, that we can't just take from the forest without killing it. We have to be in harmony with it so we can make sure the trees are healthy to be able to continue to get this, but also give back to us. So it keeps us in harmony. That's the Western Abenaki story of how maple syrup came to us.
And our thanks to Chief Stevens and the team at Polar Productions. I'm Jolie Whitney. This is Across the Fence. Have a good one.